Hello again, Magic players, and I want to welcome you back to yet another day of Zendikar Rising spoilers. They have been pumping out spoilers like crazy, and they've been giving very interesting card designs to us. So, I wanted to hop right in here and give you a few of my opinions on Day 2 spoiler review cards. So, the first one that we're going to look at is Balged Recovery and Balged Sanctuary. Now, this is a card that I think is ridiculous. Yesterday I was saying how these cards are kind of close to an auto-include, if not already an auto-include in any deck, because they can take up the slot of a land card and provide you value in the form of their spells. Well, Balged Recovery is one of the stronger effects green brings to the table, and it's in one of its strongest permutations. It is a sorcery for 2 and a green that says, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, what makes this effect powerful is that unlike a lot of the effects that we've been seeing with this, it does not say permanent card. Typically, they've been going with that wording of it as of recent, so that it feels more green, so that you return enchantments, planeswalkers, lands, creatures, the really green things. But it leaves out instants and sorceries, which are some of the more powerful types in the game, especially if you're looking for really strong one-off effects, and if you're looking for some of the most powerful finishers in Commander. Balged Recovery returns any card, so you can get that Gaia's Cradle that they destroyed, or you could return your Cyclonic Rift to rift them again. And if you need a land early game, again, Balged Sanctuary makes sure that this card is never a dead card. I think that this, again, is a auto-include in any deck that runs green, even more so than the regular auto-includes, because you're not taking out one of your cool cards. You're taking out one of your forests to run this bad boy, and I think that makes this worth it, insanely valuable, staple, for years to come. Expect to see it often and expect to play it often. Next, I want to talk about Raza Royal Chaser. Raza Royal Chaser is a cheap legendary creature costing only 1 blue and 1 red. She has 1 power and 1 toughness and has flying and haste. She reminds me a lot of Sprite Dragon in current standard, except she doesn't get bigger and badder with more instants and sorceries, and rather, she makes the next instant and sorcery you spell you cost X less to cast, where X is the number of wizards that you control as this ability resolves. A little bit tricky wording there, but, Wizards has to do what Wizards has to do to make this wizard a particularly interesting one. And we've seen wizard tribal cards before, and they have been very strong. We've also seen wizards that have had instant sorcery interactions, but never before have we seen the melding of the two quite like this. At the very least, she's going to tap to make your next instant sorcery cost 1 less, which I think is rather strong, especially coming from the command zone, essentially having a one-off Goblin Electromancer, also a wizard, so it would cost 2 less with that in the battlefield, or 3 less because its ability would count. I think this encourages you to go a little bit wider than your average Spellslinger deck does. It also lets you go a little bit taller with the instants and sorceries. So a really different take on what this deck typically is, where it normally is throwing a bunch of small instants and sorcery spells to gain incremental value. This deck wants you to play a lot of creatures and try to resolve some big spells with a lot of generic in their mana costs. So very cool. I think it's going to birth a lot of interesting archetypes. Next, we have the Maul of the Skyclaves, and why I think this one is interesting is that it's having a mechanic similar to ones that we've seen in Throne of Eldraine, and a couple of the uncommons in this set, in that Maul of the Skyclaves is a equipment. It costs 2 and a white, and it has equipped creature gets +2/+2 flying and first strike with equipped 2 generic and double white. All this said, pretty mediocre, maybe a common, definitely not a rare. However, when this enters the battlefield, you attach it to target creature you control. That means this equipment plays more like a souped up aura than it does a traditional equipment. It comes into play, auto-equips, and then, if the creature it's equipping dies, you get to move it around, or if you find a better target elsewhere, you get to put it on that instead. I think that this makes for a very powerful ability. I think that this makes for a very powerful ability, and overall, a very appeasing piece of equipment. Definitely one to consider for Voltron decks, but I think it's strong in a cube sense. Artifacts and equipments, well, strike that. Artifacts always have a good place in a cube, and equipment are usually the redhead stepchild of the artifact subtypes. However, giving this immediate value to an equipment helps pick it up where other cards leave it behind. Next, we have Nighthawk Scavengers. Nighthawk Scavengers is going to look very familiar to anyone who's played Vampire Nighthawk. It is a +1 star/3 toughness, and it has flying, death touch, and lifelink. Now, that power and toughness box is odd unless you've played a bunch of modern or you're familiar with some of the powerhouses of that format, and that little star is defined as 1 plus the number of card types among cards in your opponent's graveyards. So this is kind of a combination of Vampire Nighthawk and Tarmogoyf. And I think that this card is extremely interesting for a cube standpoint in particular. Reanimator and Self-Mill decks are very popular to put in a cube. This is a kind of card that helps fight against it on sort of a diagonal kind of attack, where instead of striking the graveyard entirely, you're instead getting a very efficient body with very relevant abilities. Having a 5 or a 6 powered flying lifelink death toucher for only 3 mana can lead to some very easy swings and roundabouts in a game of Magic. And I think that this will help power up some cubes while not taking entirely away from the Reanimator strategy that you're trying to put in there. Next, we have another pair of cards. We have Shijiri Shelter and Shijiri Glacier. Shijiri Glacier, of course, being one of the tapped lands, and Shijiri Shelter being a relatively mediocre, but because it's attached to the land, a very powerful protection effect. I think that this is another card that's just close to an auto-include in any white EDH. No, it doesn't draw you a card. Yes, it counts as card advantage, at least in my book. Because what this guy does is it's going to protect your commander from all of the targeted removal that's running in the format. If you have a Voltron commander, or if you have a commander that's particularly hated or targeted by your group of players, then this is a must include. It gets to take up a land slot, so it's basically free to include in deck building, and it provides you with that land value. You get to 1 for 1 or 2 for 1 or 3 for 1 your opponent. Plus, because of the protection clause, if the opposing deck is all of one color or a majority of one color, on a Voltron attack, this card can make it so that your general gets in for free, which is, it's so amazing, it's so powerful. I am incredibly amazed that they keep providing these powerful punches. Speaking of commander and speaking of commanders, we have another legendary creature, one with a very unique creature type, I believe never seen in all of Magic before. A demon cleric. Toolbox Hope's Demise is a 2/2 flying for 3, so Windrake stats, but it's far more than that common. It has, whenever another non-token creature is put into your graveyard, so it dies, put a +1/+1 counter on him. If it was a cleric, you may draw a card. If you do, lose a life. It also has, as long as there are 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it, it has lifelink. So this boy is quite a beater and quite a payoff. There are plenty of ways that you can go close to infinite with sacking creatures, or literally infinite with sacking creatures, to make this guy infinite power, infinite toughness, flying lifelink for just 3 mana in the command zone. A kill and a payoff is so amazing, especially if you're in a cleric deck. Providing that steady stream of card advantage and wrath protection is key, because a lot of your creatures are not going to be phenomenal, and having that level of power either in the 99 or in your command zone, again, for repeated board wipe protection, is insane. I think he's going to birth archetypes, and I think he's going to be a lot of fun to play around and play with, just as a way to make your semi-mediocre tribal deck so much more powerful, with just one card. You don't even have to change the rest of the deck. Last but not least, we have Swarm Shambler. Swarm Shambler is a cute little fungus beast, a 1/1 for 1, essentially, because it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, and whenever a creature with a +1/+1 counter on it becomes the target of a spell or ability, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token. It also has the Hangerback Walker's ability of paying 1 generic and tapping it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, this is not a Soul Ring. However, I think this is a strong turn 1 play. Any Abzan, any green, any green-black, green-white deck usually has some +1/+1 counter synergies. If you're not leaning wholly into it, this little guy can grow into a pretty reasonable threat after a few turns. If you are leaning wholly into it, he provides reasonable board protection for all of your creatures. He's kind of like a Kahira the Glass Spinner, but in green and costing 1, which is amazing. It makes it so that your opponents have to think twice before they just fire off that kill spell or path one of your dudes, because you're also getting a little bit of value behind there. And although a 1/1 isn't the most impactful card, I think that getting a few of them really helps recoup the value. Getting this card late game isn't the end of the world either, as he can grow and as he provides that board protection for your permanents. So a 1-drop that's good on turn 1 and okay on turn 20 is pretty good in my book. So that has it for today's spoilers. Again, I'm not diving into every single one because they just love to pour them on us. But here are some of the highlights that I think are really cool from the day. Please let me know what you think in the description down below. Have a beautiful day, and don't forget, somebody out there loves you.